Dumped as too ugly by the Alpha King, the Omega returned transformed and turned shame to power. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Amber had always been underestimated, her self-esteem battered by years of being judged solely on her appearance. As an Omega, she was used to being seen as less than others, but it was the cold, heartless rejection from Luke, the Alpha King, that crushed her completely. Luke had once promised her the world, but when he looked at her, all he saw was someone who didn't measure up to his standards. He called her ugly, too ordinary to stand by his side, and cast her aside without a second thought. Amber, once full of hope and dreams, was left alone, humiliated, abandoned by the very man she loved. It wasn't just about the rejection, it was about the way he had made her feel invisible, worthless. She had been nothing more than a pawn to him, a temporary companion in a world that demanded perfection. For months, Amber wandered through her pain, trying to heal the wounds Luke had inflicted. But deep down, something inside her began to stir. She was tired of being seen as less, tired of living in the shadow of other people's expectations. No longer would she let her insecurities dictate her life. Amber decided to leave, to start fresh, and to become someone stronger, someone who could never be dismissed again. She found a place far away from the judgmental eyes of her past, and there, she began her transformation. Every day, she worked tirelessly to reshape herself. Not just her appearance, but her entire identity. She honed her body, trained her mind, and learned to embrace the power that had always been inside her, waiting to be unleashed. Amber's journey was not an easy one, but with each passing day, she grew stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own worth. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming her life and proving to herself that she was worthy of greatness. And as she changed, so did the world around her. No longer the timid Omega, Amber became a force to be reckoned with. She wasn't just a woman who had been broken by the Alpha King's cruel words. She was a woman who had taken those very words and turned them into her fuel for transformation. With each moment of pain, each tear shed, Amber was forging the woman she was meant to be. The woman who would no longer be discarded, no longer ignored. The woman who would rise and claim her place at the top. Amber had spent months in solitude, rebuilding herself from the ground up. No longer the timid, rejected Omega, she had transformed into someone entirely different, strong, confident, and unrecognizable to anyone who knew her before. The changes were not just physical. Amber had worked tirelessly to reshape her mindset, to no longer be defined by the judgment of others. She had learned to appreciate herself, to see her value beyond her appearance. The pain of being discarded by Luke, the Alpha King, had been the catalyst for her transformation, but she was now ready to confront him, to show him just how much she had changed. Amber had become a force to be reckoned with, not just in her own eyes, but in the eyes of anyone who crossed her path. Her journey was far from over, but it had taken her to a place she never thought possible. She was no longer the weak Omega who had been left behind. She was powerful, and she was ready to take on whatever challenge came her way. One day, after months of training and growing stronger, Amber received word that the Alpha King had called a gathering of his closest allies. It was a chance for Amber to face Luke once again, to see if he would even recognize her, let alone acknowledge the woman she had become. Amber arrived at the gathering with a quiet confidence, her heart steady despite the anticipation. She knew the stakes. This was her moment to prove herself, not just to Luke, but to everyone who had ever doubted her. As she entered the grand hall, the eyes of everyone in the room turned toward her. Whispers filled the air as people tried to place who this woman was, her presence commanding attention. When Luke finally laid eyes on her, his face went pale. He stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe the woman before him was Amber, the same Omega he had so callously rejected. She was different, stronger, more beautiful, and undeniably powerful. Luke felt a mix of disbelief and guilt. He had never imagined that Amber would become someone like this. He had dismissed her as weak and unworthy, but now he was confronted with the reality of her transformation. Amber could see the surprise in his eyes, and for a moment, she felt a rush of satisfaction. It wasn't revenge that she wanted, not anymore. It was validation. Amber knew that Luke would never see her the same way again. She had proven her worth, and that was something he could never take away from her. As the room fell silent, Amber stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. I know I was once cast aside, but I've learned that my worth was never tied to anyone else's opinion. I am enough. I always have been. The words hung in the air, powerful and clear. Amber didn't need Luke's approval. She didn't need anyone's approval. She had found her own strength, and that was all that mattered. Luke, still in shock, struggled to find the words to respond. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Amber gave him one last look, her gaze unwavering, before she turned and walked away. The crowd watched in stunned silence as she left the room. Amber didn't look back. She had walked away from the person she used to be, and she was never going back. As she stepped into her future, she knew there was no limit to what she could achieve. She had turned her shame into power, and now, she was unstoppable. Amber's life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. No longer the fragile Omega who had once been discarded by Luke. She was now a woman of power and confidence, holding her own in a world that had always tried to keep her down. Her transformation wasn't just a physical one. It was an internal shift that had completely altered the way she viewed herself and the world around her. Her strength, both mental and emotional, had become unshakable. Amber had moved on from Luke. She had to. The pain of his rejection had been a catalyst, but the woman she had become was beyond the past. As she walked through the bustling streets of the city, Amber couldn't help but notice how different everything felt. People no longer looked at her with pity or scorn. Instead, they saw her strength, her presence, and they couldn't help but respect her. Amber had become someone people admired, not for her beauty, but for the fire inside her. Still, there were moments when the memories of Luke lingered. She had built her new life, but there were times when she wondered what might have been if he had seen her for who she truly was all along. But those thoughts were fleeting. Amber had learned that the only person who needed to believe in her was herself. Luke's rejection had been painful, yes, but it had also been freeing. It had pushed her to become someone more powerful than she ever thought possible. As time passed, Amber began to realize that her journey wasn't just about revenge on Luke. It was about self-empowerment. She wasn't just fighting for respect from others. She was fighting for her own sense of worth, and that battle had already been won. Amber had learned to trust in her abilities, and she knew that she could achieve whatever she set her mind to. One evening, as Amber sat in her apartment reflecting on all that she had accomplished, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, and the message was short but direct. We need to talk. Luke. For a moment, Amber was taken aback. She hadn't heard from him since their last encounter, and the idea of seeing him again stirred something inside her. She had moved on, or so she thought. Amber felt a mixture of emotions, curiosity, disbelief, and even a little bit of uncertainty. She had no idea what Luke wanted, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer the person she once was. Whatever his reasons were, Amber was ready. She had proven to herself that she was strong, and if Luke wanted to talk, she would face him with the same confidence and poise that had become second nature to her. The next day, Amber found herself standing outside a large, elegant building, Luke's place of residence. She could feel the weight of the moment, but it didn't faze her. Amber had faced far worse challenges, and this was nothing compared to the battles she had already won. As she stepped inside, Luke's face lit up when he saw her. His expression was a mixture of shock, admiration, and guilt. Amber could see that he was not the same man who had discarded her all those months ago. He looked humbled, almost ashamed. Luke stepped forward, hesitating for a moment before speaking. Amber, he began, but his voice trailed off. Amber could feel the tension in the air, but she was calm. She had nothing left to prove. You don't need to explain, Amber said, her voice steady and clear. I've moved on. I don't need your validation anymore. I'm not the same woman you left behind. Luke looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. I see that, he whispered. You're stronger now. Amber gave him a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. I had to be, she said simply. Amber didn't need Luke's apology. She didn't need him to fix the past. She had already done that for herself. With one last look, she turned and walked away, knowing that she had finally closed that chapter of her life for good. Amber walked away from Luke's residence, her heart surprisingly calm. She had expected some kind of emotional upheaval, but instead, there was a deep sense of peace. The chapter with Luke had finally closed, and she was ready for the next phase of her life. In the days that followed, Amber threw herself deeper into her work. She had built a reputation for herself, not just as someone who had overcome adversity, but as someone who had a purpose. She was determined to make a difference, to prove to herself that her transformation wasn't just about her own personal growth. It was about helping others who felt just as invisible as she had once felt. Amber became involved in various community projects, using her newfound position to uplift others. She mentored young women, showing them that they were not defined by their past mistakes or their appearance, but by the strength they held within. Her influence grew, and with it, her sense of fulfillment. People began to see Amber not just as the woman who had once been rejected, but as someone who had turned her struggles into something meaningful. It was during one of these charity events that Amber saw him again. Luke. He was standing at the back of the room, watching her. This time, there was no shock on his face, only respect. He had been following her progress from a distance, witnessing the woman she had become. Amber felt no anger, no resentment, only a quiet understanding. She had come so far, and it was clear to her now that Luke was just a part of her past. The present was hers to shape. Luke approached her cautiously, a hesitant smile on his face. Amber, he said softly, his voice laced with sincerity. I've been following everything you've done. I've never seen someone turn their life around the way you have. You've become incredible. Amber looked at him for a moment, measuring her words. She had no need to prove anything to him anymore. Thank you, Luke, she replied, her tone steady. But you don't need to say anything. I've already done the work. I'm proud of who I've become, and I don't need your approval to feel validated. Luke's expression faltered, the weight of her words sinking in. He had come to realize that Amber was no longer the woman who would seek his approval, but someone who had built her own path. I never meant to hurt you, he said quietly, the guilt in his voice undeniable. I made a mistake. Amber nodded, acknowledging his words, but she didn't feel the need to dwell on the past. We all make mistakes, Luke, she said. But the important thing is that we learn from them. I've learned to value myself, and I've learned that my worth isn't tied to anyone else's perception of me. Amber could see the genuine remorse in Luke's eyes, but she knew that it was too late. She had moved on, and she was no longer the woman who had relied on someone else for validation. Luke's presence no longer held the power to shake her. Amber smiled, her confidence unwavering. I hope you find the peace you're looking for, Luke, she said, before turning away and walking toward the exit. As she left the event, Amber felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known before. She had come a long way from the girl who had been discarded by Luke, and she was stronger for it. The future was full of endless possibilities, and Amber was ready to embrace them all, knowing that her worth came from within, not from anyone else's approval. Amber had reached a point in her life where she no longer looked back. The woman who had once been broken, discarded, and shamed by those she loved had transformed into someone unrecognizable, not just to others, but to herself. She had proven that her worth was not defined by others' perceptions, especially not by the man who had once rejected her. As time passed, Amber's reputation continued to grow. She had built something meaningful, both professionally and personally. Her work in the community had inspired countless individuals, particularly women, who had faced their own struggles. Amber had become a symbol of empowerment, showing that no matter where you started, your journey was yours to define. But even with everything she had achieved, something inside her was still missing. She had found fulfillment in helping others, but the void she had once felt remained. It was not a void of self-doubt or insecurity. It was the absence of someone who truly saw her for who she had become, someone who could match her strength and ambition. Amber had spent so much time proving to herself that she was strong enough on her own that she had pushed aside the possibility of anyone else standing by her side. She had been so focused on becoming independent that she had forgotten what it meant to truly let someone in. And that's when she met someone who changed everything. His name was Alexander. He was different from anyone Amber had ever known. A successful businessman with his own empire, Alexander was intelligent, kind, and most importantly, he saw Amber for who she truly was. From the moment they met, something clicked. Alexander didn't try to fix her or offer solutions to problems she hadn't even spoken aloud. Instead, he listened, he respected her, and he encouraged her to continue being the person she was becoming. Amber found herself in awe of him. Here was a man who respected her strength, but also saw the vulnerability that she had long since buried. He didn't view her as someone to be protected or saved. He saw her as an equal. For the first time in a long time, Amber allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to have someone by her side, someone who could walk with her rather than behind her. She realized that her strength wasn't diminished by allowing someone in. It was enhanced. Alexander didn't try to overshadow her accomplishments or diminish her independence. He celebrated it. They worked together, side by side, building something even greater than what Amber had ever imagined. Amber knew she had come a long way. She had gone from being rejected and discarded by someone she had loved to finding someone who could appreciate her for exactly who she was. She had learned that her worth was never tied to anyone else's perception of her, whether it was Luke's rejection or anyone else's expectations. Her worth was her own, and now, she had someone who saw that and loved her for it. The future had once seemed uncertain and filled with obstacles, but now, Amber stood confident and proud, knowing that she could face anything life threw her way. She had turned every painful moment into a stepping stone, and now, she was exactly where she needed to be. Amber had finally reached a place where she could breathe freely, knowing that the trials of her past had not defined her. With Alexander by her side, she felt a sense of completeness she had never imagined. He had become her partner in every sense, supporting her ambitions while respecting her independence. The two of them had built something incredible together, an empire of their own, one founded on mutual trust, shared values, and a deep understanding of each other. But even as Amber basked in the success she had earned, she couldn't forget the woman she had once been. It wasn't about regret. It was about remembering how far she had come. It wasn't just the external transformation. Amber had completely reshaped her inner world. She no longer feared failure or rejection. The woman who had once crumbled under the weight of judgment had become someone who walked with confidence and strength, knowing that her worth wasn't dependent on others. It was a hard-earned peace, one she never took for granted. As she worked alongside Alexander, Amber's vision grew clearer. She realized that they could do more than just build a successful business. They could create lasting change. Amber had always been driven by a desire to help others, to lift those up who had been pushed down, just as she had once been. Now, with Alexander's support, she began to put her ideas into action. They started a foundation together, focused on providing resources and mentorship for young women in need. The mission was simple: to help women find their own strength, their own voice, and the confidence to go after their dreams, just as Amber had done. Amber had been given a second chance at life, a chance to make her dreams a reality. And now, she was using that chance to give back to others. The foundation became her passion. She poured everything into it, her time, her energy, and her heart. The more she gave, the more she realized how much she had to offer. She wasn't just changing the lives of others. She was continuing to change her own life, growing into the woman she had always been destined to be. One evening, as Amber stood before a group of young women at one of the foundation's events, she couldn't help but reflect on her journey. These women, standing before her, were full of potential, but many of them still struggled with the same insecurities that had once held her back. Amber knew how they felt. She had been there. But now, as she looked at them, she saw something different. She saw strength, resilience, and hope. And she knew that each of them could overcome their own obstacles, just as she had. After the event, Alexander joined Amber backstage, his eyes filled with pride as he watched her interact with the women. "You've created something incredible here," he said, taking her hand in his. Amber smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "We've created something incredible," she corrected him gently. "This isn't just about me. It's about all of us, working together to make a difference." Alexander's smile widened as he kissed her forehead, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had built together. As they walked out of the event, Amber knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, She was ready. She had become everything she had ever wanted to be, not just for herself, but for others. And that was the greatest victory of all. Amber's life had truly transformed, and she now stood at the pinnacle of success. Her foundation was thriving, helping countless women find the courage to chase their dreams, just as she had done years ago. The journey that had begun with pain and rejection had led to a place of fulfillment and purpose. Amber was no longer the person who sought validation from others. She had found validation within herself. With Alexander by her side, her life had become a partnership built on mutual respect, love, and a shared vision for the future. Together, they had created something meaningful, something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. But despite all the success, Amber never lost sight of the struggles she had faced. She used her experiences to fuel her desire to help others, constantly reminding herself of how far she had come. One evening, as she sat at her desk reflecting on the progress of the foundation, Amber received an unexpected message. It was from her mother, someone she hadn't heard from in years. Their relationship had always been complicated, and the distance between them had grown after Amber's father left when she was young. Her mother had been distant and emotionally unavailable, and Amber had learned to cope without her support. The message was short. "I'm coming to town. I would like to see you." Amber stared at the screen for a long moment, unsure of what to feel. The years of estrangement had left her with a sense of abandonment, and the idea of seeing her mother again stirred emotions she had buried long ago. But Amber was no longer the woman who ran away from difficult situations. She had faced her past and come out stronger. This was her opportunity to confront those old wounds and decide whether or not she was ready to rebuild a relationship. After some thought, Amber decided to meet her mother. She knew that healing was a choice, and it was one she had to make for herself, not for anyone else. When they met, it was awkward at first. Her mother looked older, more fragile than Amber remembered. The years had clearly taken their toll. They exchanged pleasantries, but the tension in the air was palpable. Amber could feel the weight of their history hanging between them. Her mother spoke first, her voice hesitant. "I know I've made mistakes," she said, her eyes searching Amber's face for some sign of forgiveness. "I wasn't there for you the way I should have been. I can't change that, but I want to try." Amber felt a knot form in her chest. She had spent so much time building her own strength, and now, this woman, the one who had been absent during so many of the most important moments of her life, was asking for a second chance. It wasn't an easy decision, but Amber had learned that healing wasn't just about moving forward. It was also about letting go of the past. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Amber said quietly, "but I'm willing to try." For the first time in years, Amber felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild the relationship with her mother. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but Amber was ready to take that step. She had already rebuilt her life once. Perhaps, with time, she could rebuild the bonds that had been broken. As Amber left the meeting, her heart was heavy, but there was a sense of peace there too. She had faced one of her greatest fears, and while the future with her mother was uncertain, Amber knew one thing for sure. She was stronger now, and nothing could take that away from her. Amber had always believed that her journey was about conquering her past, overcoming rejection, and transforming herself into a woman who could stand tall in any situation. But with the unexpected message from her mother, Amber realized that there was still one piece of her past that needed attention. The meeting with her mother had opened a door, one she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through, but now she had to face it. For so long, Amber had carried the weight of her mother's absence, the feeling of being abandoned when she needed support the most. The emotional scars were deep, and while she had learned to live with them, they had never truly healed. But now, with her life in such a positive place, Amber had the clarity to see that healing wasn't just about her career or her accomplishments. It was also about healing the emotional wounds that had been left open for far too long. The days following that first meeting with her mother were filled with uncertainty. Amber wasn't sure how to move forward, but she knew one thing. She needed to take things one step at a time. She couldn't rush this. She had spent so many years learning how to be strong on her own, and now she had to learn how to rebuild a relationship that had been broken for so long. Over the next few weeks, Amber and her mother continued to meet, slowly starting to bridge the gap between them. The conversations were awkward at first, filled with uncomfortable silences and tentative words. But as time passed, something began to shift. Amber could see the genuine remorse in her mother's eyes, the sincerity in her efforts to make things right. Her mother had spent years running from the reality of their fractured relationship, but now, for the first time, she was facing it head-on. And Amber? She was learning that forgiveness wasn't just a gift to the other person. It was a gift to herself. The process wasn't easy. There were moments when Amber wanted to give up, when the old hurt resurfaced, threatening to undo the progress they had made. But with Alexander's support, Amber found the strength to keep going. He never pushed her, never told her what to do. He simply stood by her, a quiet pillar of strength. Alexander understood that this was Amber's journey, and he respected her process, no matter how long it took. It was through these small, incremental steps that Amber began to let go of the anger she had carried for so many years. She realized that holding on to the past, to the hurt, wasn't serving her anymore. Forgiving her mother didn't mean forgetting what had happened. It meant releasing the power that the past had over her. Amber had learned that healing was not a linear process. It didn't happen overnight, and there were no clear-cut answers. But as she looked at the progress she had made, both in her relationship with her mother and in her own life, she realized that she was stronger than she had ever been. She had faced rejection, overcome obstacles, and built a life that was entirely her own. Now, she was learning how to forgive, how to rebuild relationships, and how to move forward with an open heart. With Alexander by her side, Amber knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she was more than capable of handling them. She had come so far, and her story was far from over. Amber stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out over the city. The skyline was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace. The past few months had been a whirlwind of change, emotionally, professionally, and personally, but she had emerged from it all stronger and more fulfilled than ever before. Her relationship with her mother had been slowly rebuilding, one step at a time. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension, but Amber had learned that healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey, and every day, she was getting closer to the person she wanted to be. Her work with the foundation continued to thrive, helping young women find their strength and confidence. Amber had poured herself into the cause, and in doing so, she had found a sense of purpose that went beyond any personal achievement. It was about lifting others up, sharing the lessons she had learned, and empowering those who felt invisible, just as she once had. Alexander had been by her side through it all, a constant source of support and encouragement. Amber had never known what it felt like to have someone who truly believed in her, not just for what she could do, but for who she was. With him, she felt seen, valued, and most importantly, loved. They had built something together, both personally and professionally, that was grounded in mutual respect and trust. Their partnership wasn't about power or dominance. It was about collaboration, growth, and building a future they both wanted. As she stood there, reflecting on everything that had changed, Amber realized that the key to her success was not in what she had achieved, but in who she had become. She was no longer the insecure Omega who had been cast aside. She was a woman who had taken control of her destiny and used her struggles to fuel her growth. She had learned to trust herself, to forgive, and to find strength in vulnerability. The future was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. Amber had learned that the most important relationship she had was with herself. Once she had found peace within, everything else fell into place. She had found love, purpose, and strength in ways she had never imagined. Looking out at the city, Amber knew that whatever came next, she was ready. She had everything she needed to succeed, not because she was perfect, but because she had the courage to keep going, even when the road was hard. The story of her transformation had come full circle, but it was far from over. There were still challenges ahead, but Amber was no longer afraid of them. She was the author of her own story now, and she would continue to write it, one step at a time.